Hi, and welcome to today's live. This is the third live from the series of 3 lives, where I will be sharing 3 roadmaps for home bakers. In the first live, which was day before yesterday, we discussed a couple of different things for an absolute beginner. Yesterday's live, we discussed a couple of different things for somebody who's been in this field for some time and is experiencing some issues. And today's live is actually something for everyone. Today I want to talk a lot about how a recipe is created, the science that goes behind it, the process that goes behind it, and why it's not as easy as just changing a couple of ingredients and hoping it works. So I'll read out the form and I'll tell you why I chose this form. It was primarily because I relate so much with this story because this was practically my own story. And let's get started with this. So she says, I completed my graduation BBA in 2021 and was an MBA aspirant, but eventually I feel that doesn't excite me anymore. I have seen my mom baking regular tea time cakes for us and everyone used to love it. I also experimented few desserts during 2020, that is COVID time. They came out so well and I want to dig deeper in this field. I made up my mind to drop MBA and be a full-time baker. That is actually exactly what happened with me. I was pursuing graduation, but I was already baking. Like Redlands was already set up while I was graduating, and after that, there was a point when my family was sort of asking me, "So what's next? Are you planning on, finally pursuing some masters in this field?" Or I was studying nutrition, by the way. So, am I planning on becoming a nutritionist, or am I planning on continuing Redolence? What is exactly the plan? And it was very, very clear that this is exactly what I want to do. So that is why I chose this form, especially because of the next part. Then I joined a few classes from Delhi, and now I'm running a small home bakery in my hometown Rishikesh since last year. Sorry, I have to read this form, which is why the camera has to shift constantly. I bake and sell regular frosted cakes in whipped cream, cheesecake, brownies, cakesicles, muffins, cupcakes, dry cakes, and a few more desserts. Already this menu sounds like a really, really big variety. I wonder how you manage such a big menu, but from home especially. But honestly, if you want, you can actually manage it as long as you can interchange these ingredients and interchange these small components. For example, the same sponge can go into cakesicles and also for cupcakes, but then dry cakes and muffins need separate bases, right? So just need to be a little bit good at managing your inventory when you have a huge menu like this. I do experiment and try new things like macarons and cookies currently. Now comes the interesting part. I usually struggle with creating recipes, although I provide baked desserts to my clients with same consistency. But still, when I experiment, I can't dig deep into it and create my own recipes. Okay, so by the way, today's session will not be very, very long. This is basically the only thing I want to talk about, and that is recipe creation, because every single day, somebody messages me in my DMs that how do you create recipes? I want to create my own recipes. Can I take your courses and then can I create my own recipes? The answer is yes. If you are learning from a good place, their goal will be to make you so well educated in this field and your concepts are so clear in this field that you can make any variations yourself. You don't have to depend upon, like, you don't have to think, okay, if I use a fruit here, will it work? Because a couple of times you'll ask such questions like, what if I use a banana here? Will it work? And then, for example, in my case, if you tell me, will a banana work in that particular recipe, I will tell you if it works, yes, why? If it doesn't work, why not? And at the end of literally any course, my goal is to make sure that you are able to understand why each and every ingredient is being used, why in this quantity, and what will happen if you change this, what will happen if you substitute this. Okay, so there's a question. Can I create variations of your recipes from GCCM course? Absolutely. Every single recipe in that course is completely customizable. Obviously, major changes like completely swapping out one kind of sugar for no sugar or a different kind of sugar is not possible for obvious reasons, because again, I explain why sugar is playing such an important role. But in general, yes, variations can be created from any recipe you like. I'll go step by step into this process. So if I had to teach you how to create recipes, first thing I would do is I would teach you how to study every ingredient. What is the role of every ingredient in a recipe? For example, plain old flour, okay, regular flour. What is the role of flour? Flour will play the role of a structural agent. Flour will play the role of, it provides protein, it provides starch. Flour also provides obviously gluten in the sense that it will provide you that chewy texture. How gluten works, all these things you need to understand them. Then I will ask you to understand the concept of sugar, then fat, then if you're using eggs, then eggs, then the difference between oil and butter. So once you understand the role of every ingredient, write it down somewhere, and then after that go to the next part, and that is understanding why ratios are important in a recipe. For example, what will happen if you add too much oil versus too little oil, too much flour versus too little flour? For example, yesterday in my private community, I asked people, okay, what are your brownie struggles? When you make brownies, you struggle with them, and why do you struggle with them? What are your common problems? So a lot of people said that their brownies usually sink from the center and they get dry on the edges, or their brownies don't really ever bake up in the middle. Like it's always like wet batter, it just never takes shape. To that, if again, couple, like maybe a decade ago, I would not have any answers to this. But since the past whole decade, I've been experimenting this. So now I know that when you make a brownie recipe, the flour is playing a very important role, especially in the recipes which do not have eggs. Because eggs were, like the story I posted today, eggs have a specific role. Eggs have so many roles, but in brownies, they have a specific role of providing structure and also emulsification. But if you don't have eggs, you need to put a lot of flour, lot more flour compared to an egg-containing brownie recipe. All of this is something which you need to understand by actually experimenting. Most of it is just experimentation. People ask me, do you suggest a book? Do you suggest a separate course for this? And I'll be honest, I cannot suggest a book, because a book can never make do all those experiments on your behalf. And also, a book cannot usually help you with eggless recipes. Egg-based recipes, yes, there are a lot of books which can help you out, but not for eggless recipes, because there's not much research done on them anyway. So, okay, so the second step was understanding how ratios work. For example, what happens if you add too much of flour or too little of flour, too much of fat, too little fat, too much sugar, too little sugar. It's not just going to affect the consistency of the batter, but also the overall result of the cake, brownie, bread, whatever you're baking. In this sense, if you want to experiment and create your own recipes, the first thing I will suggest is breads. With breads, they are very forgiving when it comes to recipe creation, because you can always add or reduce the amount of flour and get drastically different results. With other things like cakes and muffins and especially brownies, it's so much harder, because so many things can go wrong. They have so many ingredients. Okay, now the third step after you study the ratios would be to study the processes which go in this whole recipe. For example, while you're making a cake, how is gluten formation working? When you're making a brownie, how long do you need to bake it for, and what is happening when you're baking it? For example, in my brownies course, which is going to launch in a couple of days, day after tomorrow quite literally, I teach people the chemistry that goes inside the oven while the brownie is inside the oven, and the chemistry which goes when it comes, the chemistry which is happening in the brownie after it is outside the oven. So while it is cooling, there is still a lot of science which is going on inside this recipe. Same goes for breads, for example. When you're baking the breads, the bread is obviously, it's rising, it's getting dried out. After you take it out of the oven, if you cut it when it's hot, you have messed up this process called continued cooling, continued baking. Your bread was outside the oven, it needed some time to just bake more in the residual heat, and the starches would have solidified. But no, you sliced it hot and now it's gummy and raw in the middle. So when you understand these processes, I'll give you a couple more examples. The process of whipping up butter with sugar. Why do you need it in a pound cake recipe, for example? What happens if you don't whip up the butter with sugar? What happens if you melt the butter instead? For example, in my cookies recipe, there is one recipe which has melted butter, one recipe which has whipped butter, third recipe which has frozen butter which we are grating on top of our flour, fifth recipe where we are whipping the butter again but at a different temperature, sixth recipe where we don't have any butter, and seventh recipe where we are using ghee. How are we making different cookies just by altering this ingredient's temperature? So there's a specific process which is happening inside this recipe, right? So you understand these processes, the gluten formation, the fermentation, the leavening, the caramelization, the Maillard reaction, all these processes. Once you understand them, you will know exactly how you can manipulate these processes. Baking is basically a game of science and manipulation. After this, you have studied the recipes, the processes, and the ratios. Then you take a couple of ingredients and you find a recipe which you like. For example, you go on the internet and you find a cake recipe. Let's take a sponge cake recipe, for example. You take a sponge cake recipe and you study it. You study how much flour we are using, how much sugar we are using, how much baking soda, baking powder we are using, how much baking soda, baking powder, how much liquid we're using. So important. So you write down these ingredients and the quantity in which you're using them and sort of round it up, right? So this is called baker's percentage, which is, I believe, if you try to search this on YouTube, you'll find a lot of recipes, a lot of videos explaining baker's percentage. But you basically take the recipe and make sort of make a formula with it. For example, if we are using 1 cup of flour, we are using 3/4 cup of sugar, we are using 3/4 cup of liquid, and we are using 1/2 cup of fat, just as an example. And now you bake this recipe, and then you note down what you feel about this. For example, you feel that this recipe is not fluffy enough. Okay, so you write it down. It's not fluffy enough. Then you feel like this recipe is too dry. You write down this recipe is too dry. And you feel like this recipe, or maybe you write down that this recipe sunk. This recipe was too wet. So you write down exactly what happened when you tried this recipe. And now, based on this particular inference from this recipe, you check out what you studied earlier, the role of each and every ingredient, and now you see what messed this up. For example, if my recipe sank, what messed it up? Was it because I added too much of leaveners? If yes, make another trial with lesser leaveners. For example, if you found that the recipe got too brown on top, was it because I over baked it, or was it because I added too much sugar and the sugar crystallized on top? So now you know, and then you reduce the sugar and the baking time. So you manipulate every aspect of the recipe, one trial at a time. And yes, it is exactly how intimidating it sounds, but that is the truth. That is how recipes are created from scratch. And actually, it's even tougher to do this if you're doing this for a commercial purpose. Like, for example, my recipes are commercially viable. So I also have to make sure that you get consistent results every single time. I also have to make sure that these recipes are profitable, so I cannot use something expensive. I cannot blindly just increase the amount of butter, because that will also take up the cost of the whole recipe, right? So that is how you have to keep in mind those factors as well. And then you keep trying, keep changing the quantity of one ingredient based on what you already learned. And sometimes you might need to change the process. For example, in bread recipes, sometimes the same recipe will work differently when you bake it versus I bake it. Or sometimes it will work differently when I bake it here versus I bake it in Shimla, because the altitude is different, the temperature is different. In this case, you need to understand what processes are at work. For example, proofing will take much longer in a colder environment versus in a hotter environment, proofing will be very, very quick. So I need to let it proof for a longer time. This is precisely why I tell people never to depend upon the exact baking time mentioned in the recipe, the exact fermentation time mentioned in the recipe. and the exact baking temperature mentioned in the recipe, because your oven will work differently, your temperature is working differently, your ingredients will also work differently sometimes, and that is why it's super important that you understand the core of a recipe. And that's why you need somebody in the beginning of your journey. You need somebody who can tell you where you went wrong. That is my aim as a teacher as well. So with all of this information, you can create 10,000 recipes with just 5 or 6 ingredients. What you need to do is understand the science, understand the role of every ingredient, understand how ratios work, and the key processes. Okay, so after this, she says, I'm just reading the rest of the letter. Another aspect which I find difficult is making the clientele. My clients trust my work and me, but I need to increase my reach so that I can have direct effect on sales. For this, I need to stay active on Instagram, maybe needs more posting, and make myself a part of exhibition and stalls which take place in our city. This is something which we discussed in a lot of detail in yesterday's live, so you can go back on my profile and check out the live from yesterday. Then she says pricing is another pain point to be focused on. That also I revealed yesterday. So next week, around 19th of May, hopefully, we'll have a live class on pricing. So don't miss that. It's going to talk about the mindset, the buyer psychology, the pricing strategies, discounts, how to deal with clients when they say that your price is too much or too little. So it's going to talk about everything. Okay, next she says, honestly, I have no idea how to fix this. I have tried putting more attention to each and every ingredient that goes in, take detailed notes of everything I bake, but I couldn't get any fruitful results. Now this, I'll tell you why this didn't work. This is also something I hear from a lot of students. Firstly, I believe that not a lot of information is out there. The literature on eggless baking especially is very limited, very, very limited. There is a lot of literature on food science. So when I was studying, one of the subjects I was studying was food science, which is why I sort of got into it. And then also I have a tendency to obsess. And that works in my favor when it comes to this. I would literally bake. For example, I was practicing the pound cake recipe for my dry cakes class, and I made close to 50 pound cakes to a point where my own family still sort of has trauma from eating pound cakes. They still don't eat pound cakes because of how many pound cakes I fed them. And I'll tell you, the last 3 or 4 trials were just because I wanted it to be less fluffy and I wanted it to not have brown specks inside. And I went crazy just trying to figure that recipe out, just trying to make changes, just trying to literally reduce 1/16th of a teaspoon of baking soda in each and every trial. So yes, the first problem is that there is not enough literature which is available on eggless baking. No books, no research, not much is done outside India, especially on eggless baking. You won't find it. The second problem is that courses are not teaching science of eggless baking. So they will teach the absolute basics and call it that I have taught the science, but that's not really enough. If you want to learn recipe development, that's not enough. You need to know a lot more than just the absolute basics to nail some of these recipes. Like for example, sometimes I feel like even in my courses, I sort of feel the need to add more and more. Like as I keep on studying, I want to keep sharing that, and that is why I want to create additional modules and add them to my courses. The reason is that with science, it's never really over. The journey is never really over. You have to continuously update yourself. Even in baking, for example, couple years ago, I did not know a couple of reactions that are taking place, and now I know, and that's why recipe development takes me much lesser time now. So if you are someone who wants to create your own recipes, I would suggest spending time in understanding these ingredients, having a lot of patience with your trials, and that's why I had to spend literally years learning all of this, years experimenting this from scratch. And that's why that is my way of teaching now. I just like to teach it this way. Let's move ahead. Moreover, I'm struggling with low sales and lesser reach for my home bakery. This also I discussed in yesterday's live and also in a lot of detail in the 90-day baking business class. In case you want it, just send me a message and I'll send you the link for that class. But I explained this in a lot of detail in that class. I also want to create and bake new desserts for expansion of my menu. Honestly, you already have a very, very big menu. I don't think you should add more things in your menu. Maybe just refine what you're already doing. Instead of throwing everything on the wall and seeing what sticks, maybe just focus on finding the best recipes which can work for you, make them more profitable. And also, since your clientele is limited, I would suggest you to reduce your menu to something which is crowd pleaser and which gets you frequent orders again and again, instead of focusing on way too many things together. I want to grow in this field and gain more knowledge in various aspects of baking to get a consistent income from this home bakery business and fulfill financial needs. She also wants to work with few extraordinary bakers or chefs under their guidance so that she can learn many tips and tricks which I won't otherwise. I don't think it's true. I have actually worked in commercial bakeries before, and I'm not sure if I learned a lot, because in India especially, I cannot speak for outside India when it comes to this, but in India especially, most of the bakeries are not making things from scratch. Like their sponges are made with premixes. A lot of even home bakers are making sponges with premixes. So the thing is that there's not much to learn in commercial kitchens in that sense, unfortunately. Unlike one of my friends who's in Australia, he worked in a bakery it was actually a bread bakery. So he worked there to learn the craft, and he learned a lot from them. Actually, I learned from him, and I was surprised at how much detail he was able to capture from that whole process. But in my experience of working in Indian bakeries, I did not feel that way. I felt a little dissatisfied with my experience. I didn't learn enough, but it was also not their responsibility to teach me. They were not paying me. I was not paying them to teach me, so it was not their responsibility. Okay. In a long run, I plan to open a small outlet or something, but it's just a fantasy. I hope you get at what point I'm in right now. Maybe I'm not clear enough to explain few points here, but surely you will come up with a better helping roadmap for me. I actually completely understand this because I was in the same place. So if I were you, I would reduce my menu to some smaller smaller number of items in the menu, because you already have too many items in the menu, and I would offer those same items in many flavors instead of offering so many different products. Another thing I would do is I would sit down and actually invest my time in learning the science, because you're so passionate about recipe creation yourself. Take out the time to understand the science, the core. Find someone who can help you with understanding how every ingredient is working. When you're making the recipes, if they are failing, why they are failing, and what needs to be done to improve them, because that is honestly the quickest way of learning the science, by understanding what went wrong. That is what I again, if you choose to work with me, that is my aim. With a lot of students are in this live, so I think they can tell you that is my aim as a teacher as well, that I like to help them out. I like to stay in touch with them, and I want to see what they've baked so they can send those photos to me, and then I sit down with them and I try to understand what went wrong here, how can you improve this. Did you accidentally add too much sugar? Did you not measure it properly? Did you bake it for too long? Is your oven not working fine? And through this process, they learn very, very quickly. I have seen students who work with me for just 1 year, and they know much better than a lot of people who come to me after being in this industry for literally 5 to 7 years. So that's how I work. With this, I would also like to announce the launch for the best-selling brownies bundle. In this bundle, I have covered so many things, so much of science, actually recipe development too. Throughout the course, in almost every chapter, I've explained what happened when I was developing this recipe. Why did I need to improve this recipe in the first place? And it's just full of so much of information. After this live ends, in the caption you will find a discount coupon which you can use, and you will absolutely love this discount. And I also want to tell you about a bonus. If you get the whole bundle, you'll also get an amazing bonus which will teach you 6 different styles of selling brownies, which are not just brownie pieces. Then you can charge a lot more for your brownies for the same thing, just presented differently. I also want to tell you a little bit about the course in terms of the lessons. So it doesn't just teach the science, but it also teaches how to make endless variations in the same recipe, how to manipulate the texture of the recipe a little bit, how to store it for a longer time, because I want you to have this recipe commercially, how to make it in bulk, how to do the pricing. I will share the list of ingredients, all the links with the brand names which I use and which you should use. You will also get my vendors' contacts. Basically, this will be the only brownie course you will ever need in your whole life. Actually, you can practically start a whole business based on just this one course. With this, now I would like to just answer all the questions which I had got. If you have any more questions, just drop them here. I am checking out the questions now. Okay. So the first question is, can I create variations of your recipes from the GCCM course? I think I answered this before, but yes, you can. You can absolutely create variations in my sponge cakes recipe. Although, why would you want to create? Because it's already so damn perfect. But yes, if you want to create any variations, absolutely feel free to do that. The next question is, in every recipe, can we replace butter with oil since both work as fats? No, you cannot. This is also a very big part in the brownies class and also in some of my other classes and my cookies class as well, where I explain why butter and oil are not the same thing. Butter has 20% moisture, 80% fat. Oil has 100% fat. Do you see? So 100 grams of butter will give you only 80 grams of fat. 100 grams of oil will give you 100 grams of fat. So you cannot always replace them. And also, do you see how butter gets solid in the fridge, but oil does not get solid in the fridge unless it's coconut oil? That is also why butter-based cakes are harder in the fridge, but oil-based cakes stay soft. That's why sponge cake recipes which I make are made with oil and not butter. Okay, the next question is, even with recipe, please tell me about temperatures also. So the temperature, every recipe will work differently. For example, in breads, we use a much higher temperature so that they can rise quickly. In brownies, we use like a medium temperature. We don't bake it at a very high temperature. For a lot of cakes, we use like 150, 160 degrees Celsius temperature. So temperatures depend upon the kind of effect you're you're seeking in this recipe. Is there any other question? Fruit variations of sponges. I never suggest adding fruits in sponges. I'll tell you why. Sponges are supposed to be just a vehicle for your filling and your frosting. They're not supposed to be the main element of your cake. So your sponge has the only function of being very fluffy and flavorful, but not of being super strong in flavor. Which is why I suggest, if you want to make your sponges in a different flavor, try chocolate, vanilla, maybe some spices like cardamom, cinnamon, something like that, but not fruits. Because if you add fruits to the sponges, it will reduce the shelf life, and you don't want to do that. Instead, use your fruits in your filling. I have taught you how to make the fillings. Instead, use those fruits in the fillings and use fresh fruits on top of the cake, but not inside sponges. Then there's a question on, can I please suggest some Indian brands for chocolate? I will actually be making a reel, or if I don't post the reel quickly because I have this issue, I will DM you the names of the Indian brands of chocolate. I like to honestly use Van Houten the most, especially from the past few years. Price wise also it's really good, and it's always consistent. Like every single batch I've purchased, Van Houten is always consistent. So there's one more question, which is, what mode to bake brownies, both rod on or bottom rod on? That depends upon the brownie recipe. I always suggest to use just the bottom rod on for fudgy brownies, and If your recipe asks for top rod on, then sure, but my recipes always ask for bottom rod on only. So I hope this helped. Thank you so much for joining in. If you have any more questions, my DMs are always open. Feel free to send me a message. I'll be very, very happy to help. And hope to see you all, very excited to see you all for 1st of May, where, okay, there is one more question. Sometimes when we make a recipe once and it sells, can I permanently add that in my menu? How to create demand for that? No, not, I mean, I won't suggest you to add something in your menu just because it worked for you once, because that's a little too quick. Maybe make it at least 4 or 5 times and see how the response is, send samples to people, get enough feedback, and then add it. But don't add it right away. Don't add it just because it worked once. There's another question. Can you suggest how I can learn to bake gluten-free? Unfortunately, I don't specialize in gluten-free baking yet. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I didn't specialize in it. A lot of people who are celiac, not a lot of, every person who is celiac, who has a celiac allergy, cannot consume gluten at all. They cannot consume wheat at all. Not even, they cannot consume food made in the same kitchen with the same utensils unless it is completely sanitized. And that is a lot of work. In my kitchen, I use wheat all the time. So I don't have the capacity to sanitize my whole kitchen for gluten-free baking. But if you are trying to avoid gluten for health purposes, honestly, I study nutrition, and I don't think there's enough evidence that gluten is harmful to you. Yes, overconsumption of carbs is harmful, but not gluten. So that's why I don't believe in making gluten-free foods and calling them healthy. In fact, my whole approach towards healthy baking is also a little controversial, because I believe that desserts are supposed to be enjoyed as treats and not really supposed to be eaten every single day. And if you can, I mean, once in a while, sugar, butter, everything is okay. We consume far more problematic stuff in our day-to-day life, and just to try to, eat healthy desserts and feel good about it is probably being a little bit delusional. So I don't believe in that. The next question is, can you conduct classes only on science of baking? All of my courses actually, maybe apart from 1 or 2 of my courses, but most of my courses are actually mostly based on the science of baking. I'll tell you the reason why it's impossible to teach just the science of baking as theory. Because you need practical experiments with it, right? So if you take my, for example, art and science of cafe style cakes, or especially this brownies masterclass, you will find that there are literally 2 or 3 whole units based on just the science. And throughout the recipes also, I keep explaining the science. So yes, every single one of my course teaches the science of baking. Where can I learn gluten-free baking? I have no clue. I'm sorry. If I know someone who teaches great gluten-free recipes, I will definitely connect you. Just drop me a message and I'll make sure to connect you. In my recipes, like in my cakes recipe, there is one recipe in my course. There is one recipe which is gluten-free. So in case you want that, I would be very happy to have you in that class. Gluten-free baked goods sell good in stalls. Is it a good idea? I don't think they sell very well in stalls. The price is high, and I don't think there's as much demand for gluten-free baking as we think. Because I also wanted to experiment in this many years ago, but I realized that it was sort of made up in my own head that people are looking for healthy products. But at the end of the day, they just wanted great tasting products. So I hope there are no more questions. If there are any more questions, feel free to send me a DM. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being so enthusiastic. Thank you for participating and being so engaging. I had a great time, and with this we end the series of 3 lives. And I hope to see you all in the Brownies best-selling bundle.